we don't really need an alien entity coming in and telling us that the amount of suffering that exists in the world right now is completely man-made. Have you ever just read a book at the exact right time in your life, and you know that if you had read it at any other point in your life, you probably wouldn't have appreciated it as much, but because you read it at the precise moment that you needed it, it was one of the most fantastic books that you probably have ever read? Well, that's how I felt with The Seep by Chana Porter. But before I get to that, hey, my name is Frank, and welcome back to my channel where I do talk about all things bookish. So I just have a very short, unscripted video for you today because I am going to do something that I don't normally tend to do, and that is I'm going to give you a spoiler-free review and recommendation of this book, and that is because it was just an absolutely beautiful read for me. It did have a couple of issues, but I mostly didn't even care because, like I said, I read this book at exactly the moment I think I was supposed to. I have been struggling quite a bit with the weight of the world recently and just opening up TikTok and reading news and like just seeing the ugliness of everything that is transpiring all over the globe. It's been really hard to ground myself and to, I don't even want to say stay in reality, because the truth is that I have been doing my damnedest to not be a part of reality as much as I can lately. I have been struggling with my sobriety. I've been sober for, God, I mean, 2018. So, like, 8 years at this point. And I am finally hitting a point where I'm like, oh, well, everything sucks. So, who gives a shit, right? Um, I mean, I haven't relapsed or anything, but it is one of those things where like reading is helping a lot right now. Let me just put it like that. Not to get too vulnerable on the internet here. Sorry. But yeah, so The Seep by Chana Porter. So this novel is about 200 pages, and it is I would call it like a soft sci-fi mixed with literary fiction. When I say soft sci-fi, I mean that's because it doesn't have a lot of the traditional points that science fiction tends to have, which is like very heavy world building and very plot driven novels usually. So it does have world building, and for me, it was just the right amount. It was perfect. It was so seamless, so effortless. But some people critiqued it because they thought the world building could have been stronger. Again, that's why I'm saying this is a soft science fiction novel. It's like sci-fi and lit fic had a baby, and it just came out to be one of the most beautiful, heart-wrenching stories about grief that I have read recently. So if you would like to know more about it, basically it is about a woman named Trina who is alive during basically the end of the world as we know it. There is an alien invasion that happens at the very beginning of the story, and she has to navigate living in this world and reckoning with the grief and loss of her wife. At its heart, the story is it's a book about grief. It is a book about heartache, struggling to reckon with the fact that change happens whether we like it or not, and our main character is just struggling to do that. She's struggling to be okay with the idea of change and with the loss of her wife. So, one of the things I really loved about this was the gender queer representation. Our main character is trans, but there are also a couple moments throughout the book where, like, characters that we don't ever get to meet, just people that Trina passes by and sees. She refers to them as their gender being ambiguous, and she calls them someone of ambiguous gender, right? And that happens about 2 times in the book that I recall. I loved this so much. I really did, because it just goes to show that in this new world with this new amazing sentient non-corporeal alien life form that has connected all of humanity and eradicated social and political, financial, racial, gender hierarchies, like completely destroyed these ideas of needing a hierarchy. Sicknesses have been healed, people are immortal, like super amazing world, okay? And like I said, for me it was the perfect amount of world building, but it was just really beautiful to see. As someone who claims to be an anarchist, specifically an anarcho-feminist, I absolutely loved this representation of what a world would look like post class, post race, post gender. And it's not that in this new world these things are not important, it's just that they are not a defining characteristic of what position someone is allowed to hold in the world, right? It's important because it's important as a sense of self, as part of our identities, as our histories, but it is not important in the grand context of how we are allowed to operate in the world. And I absolutely loved that. Now, I don't want to give too much away because I genuinely would love for you to read this book. But I will say that there are some major time jumps that happen in this book. This book takes place, it's only 200 pages, like I said, but it takes place over the course of about 35 years. So when the book opens up, there's the alien invasion happening. And then in chapter 1 or 2, we're kind of thrust about 30 years forward in the future. And then another event happens. And then after that, we're thrust another 5 years into the future. So there were some critiques about the time jump and how it wasn't very seamless, or it felt very confusing, and that people wished that the author had taken some more time to build this world instead. But again, this is a character oriented and character driven novel. That is why I feel like it is more literary fiction than science fiction, because it is about the internal struggles of our main character and her finding herself in this new world without her wife. So while I can appreciate why people wanted more world building, I feel like as a reader, we got exactly the perfect amount of what we were meant to see about how this alien species has influenced humanity and affected the world at large, and has answers some really interesting questions about ethics and about suffering and pain, and how we as human beings could potentially mitigate these things, because we don't really need an alien entity coming in and telling us that the amount of suffering that exists in the world right now is completely man-made, and that we have the power to minimize that to a great degree. And if you disagree with that, I wonder why that is, right? Money is not real. We all know this. This is a man-made concept that we have deemed to be important, but it doesn't have to be important. If we all woke up tomorrow and said, hey, money actually doesn't fucking matter. You know what matters? Making sure that everybody has access to food and clean water and shelter and housing and education and medical care. We can guarantee those things. You know why? Because we have the scientific knowledge to do that. We have access to renewable energy that we could focus on. We have access to renewable and sustainable resources. We have the technology to ensure that these things are able to be manufactured and distributed globally within hours. Okay. So the next time you think to yourself, there's absolutely no way, suffering is inevitable. Suffering is inevitable in the way that sickness is going to happen. Suffering is inevitable in the way that you are going to lose a loved one at some point in your life, and you're going to have to carry that grief. But suffering because you cannot feed yourself, suffering because you have no housing, suffering because you cannot afford an education or healthcare, that is man-made, that is made up, and we don't need to live that way. And this is my rant for this video, because like I said, there has been a lot weighing on my mind in the context of global suffering at the moment. And to read this book at this point and to see this world that I have pictured in my mind and in my heart, to see this come to fruition in this book was amazing. And that's not to say that suffering did not still exist or did not play a part in this book. And that's kind of what the whole thing was about, was our main character reckoning with this idea of grief, reckoning with this idea of suffering despite living in a utopia, and saying, you know what, that's okay. That's still part of my story. This is still part of who I am. My pain is a part of me, and that's okay. It's okay to hurt sometimes. And I fucking loved this book so much. Like I said, the time jumping was a little bit weird, and I do wish we had gotten to learn a bit more about the compound. If you have read this book, then you know what I'm talking about. But outside of those two critiques, everything about this was amazing. Chapters 7 and 8 were strange. Like, the writing felt a little bit disjointed from the rest of the book. But again, outside of that, this was like, it was like a fever dream of grief and humor and wit. There's an amazing pun that happens towards the end of the book. And I loved this book. And that's why I'm not going to tell you anything more than that, because I would love for you to love this book too. And if you read this and you hate this book, then that's fine as well. But for me, this is just one of those things where I think had I read it at any other point in my life, I probably would have not enjoyed it as much. I probably would have been a little bit harsher in my critique about it. But because I read this at the right time for me, this just, it touched me in a very profound way, and I'm very glad to have read this. And that is also why I want to bring up the, a quick update. If you have seen my Trans Rights Readathon video, I am participating in the Trans Rights Readathon this year. This is my first year ever doing it. And if you've seen that video, you know my TBR was about 6 books long for this event. And since then, one of the updates is that I have bumped it up to 10, and that the Seep was actually one of the additional 4 books that I had decided to take on or attempt to take on. And I'm so glad that I did. I'm so glad that I did. It was a very beautiful book, and very quick read. I don't know. So yeah, that's just this quick 15-ish minute video about The Seep by Chana Porter. If you have read it, I would love to know what your thoughts were. Did it affect you as well in a positive way, or were you one of the people that felt like it could have been a bit stronger and a bit more fleshed out? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say about this book. Genuinely, please do. Please do leave a comment. I know I'm saying that because, like, engagement or whatever, but like, made this account I made this channel because I love talking about books. And again, talking about books, that's a conversation. That's between one or more people. And so I can't just be up here yapping by myself. If you have read this book, I genuinely actually do want to know what you thought about it. Until next time, y'all.